Hey there, students. Welcome back to the second part of my lecture on the rise of Hitler. Chandler and Natalie, this is for you. We left off last time in 1921 when Hitler was elected leader of the Nazi Party, the National Socialist German Workers Party. Now, at the time, this party was a very small operation, just, a few hundred people. They actually started off their party membership list at number 500 to make it look like there were more people in the party than were actually there. So there really weren't a lot of people at the party when Hitler got there. But Hitler is going to turn this party from something that is just a meeting of a few radicals to a party that is really going to be a viable player on the political stage. And what we're going to be looking at here is how Hitler turns the Nazi Party from a very small fringe movement into one of the major political parties in Germany by the late 1920s. And so there are three events that really represent a turning point for the Nazi Party and for Hitler, the leader of the Nazi Party. In 1923, you're going to see the beer hall putsch. And then 1924, Hitler in prison. 1925, the publication of the first volume of Mein Kampf. So the beer hall putsch, which is a 1923 event, this was a failed Nazi attempt to overthrow the government by force. So the Nazis, they decided this government is weak enough to where they got together in Munich and they were going to, they went in here and they surprised these leaders of the government. And for a while, people didn't even know if this was going to be successful or not. But then the police and the military sided with the government, and then Hitler and his helpers, I guess for lack of a better word, that they were put on trial. You see in this picture the defendants, and notice that this says something about the National Socialist German Workers Party, that you see of these 9 people, only 2 of them are in civilian clothing. So Hitler and one more guy are in civilian clothing. The rest of these men are wearing their military uniforms. So you see really the militaristic nature of this party. And so Hitler goes to jail for 264 days. For what? For treason. All right, now this is just stupid. All right, just let me go off on this for a second, all right? Because there are so many things in history that happen just because of somebody's stupidity, all right? Because somebody was an idiot. And when somebody commits treason, it's like in America, you die if you commit treason. But, hey, 264 days, bet he learned his lesson. They even let him order like a whole bunch of beer every month and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it was almost like staying in a hotel or something like that. But here's a lesson, that if you're ever in charge of a government and you run into this person who tries to violently overthrow the government, take them out, okay? Whether it's Hitler, whether it's Fidel Castro, you look at 2 of the most brutal dictators of the 20th century, and both of these guys made a very sloppy attempt to overthrow the government. They were put in jail, and then the government's like, oh, hey, let's be nice. Let's show everyone how nice we are, and let's let these people out that want to overthrow the government. And then they turn around, they overthrow the government. It's kind of like a serial killer that typically their first kill is going to be very sloppy, but then they learn how to do it right. And that's what happened with 2 of the most brutal dictators of the 20th century, Fidel Castro and Adolf Hitler. Now, there is one point of departure, though, where Hitler is different than Castro. While Castro went to the jungle when he got out and started a guerrilla warfare campaign once he was able to get back into Cuba, that the objective here for Hitler is to overthrow the government. But Hitler decides that, you know what? There could be another approach to this, that I don't really have to go the route of violent revolution. Malcolm X once gave a speech, The Ballot or the Bullet. And the whole point of Malcolm X's speech is that if elections don't work, guns will. That we will try the ballot, but if the ballot doesn't work to get justice in this country, then perhaps the bullet will. Now, Hitler, it's really kind of Malcolm X in reverse. The bullet or the ballot. If guns don't work, elections will. And the lesson that Hitler learned in jail is that the beer hall putsch was a bad idea. That really the Nazi Party needs to use the democratic process in order to seize power. That this can be done without firing a single shot. And this is Hitler's goal, to do the same thing that he was doing, to overthrow the government, but to do it without firing a shot. So how does he do it? First of all, he publishes his book, Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle, published in 2 volumes in 1925 and 1926. And this book really doubled as an autobiography and as a political manifesto. So he's telling you about himself, all right, so that you can get to know Hitler, and then he's going into his politics and why the current system was failing. And the thing is here that when you think about Germany in the mid-1920s with the reparations, with the hyperinflation and the bad economy and all of that kind of stuff, there were a lot of people who were struggling. So the idea here is that, hi, I'm Hitler. My struggle is your struggle. And that's what he's trying to do, is to try to write a book that will allow people to get introduced to him and his ideology, because his goal here is to form a political party, to use the democratic process. And the other side of this is the use of political propaganda. Now, Hitler accomplishes this through his propagandist, Joseph Goebbels. And Goebbels is responsible for, just this propaganda line. Now, we see here a propaganda poster, and this says Germany's liberation. Now, you see a swastika and an eagle. You see some chains. I don't know if Prometheus was there, or maybe the eagle was chained or something like that. Now, this poster was published during a period when the Nazi Party was formally banned. So you don't see anything about the Nazi Party, but you see this swastika, this symbol of the Nazi Party, and the talk of Germany's liberation, that Germany's chained up, the Nazi Party can do something about it. And then we see here a poster, National Socialism, the organized will of the nation. And you see here just the type of artistry with the square jaws. You see these guys that, they are what you would call stormtroopers. All right, these were the Nazi SA, as they called them. And here is Hitler with stormtroopers. Now, these stormtroopers are a lot of ex-veterans and people like that, but this is the paramilitary wing of Hitler's operation. So people that were in the Nazi Party, a lot of them wore military uniforms, and they had a militaristic sort of organization. And so this poster idealizes the paramilitary element. And a lot of these Nazi propaganda posters were drawn by a guy named Mjolnir. Now, this wasn't actually his name, Mjolnir. Now, Mjolnir is the hammer of Thor. That's what it's called. And so this guy, he's an artist, okay? Artists can be a little quirky, right? So it's just like, hey, I'm Mjolnir. And it's like, wait, isn't that like a hammer or something like that? Like, who are you? And it's like, well, he's Joseph Goebbels' propaganda artist. So, I don't know, he sits down to draw some propaganda. He's like, it's hammer time, or, but just not hammer and sickle time, because that would be communist. And, he's not a communist. He's a Nazi propagandist. All right, not that one's necessarily any better than the other. But the thing is here that you see Goebbels here with his artist Mjolnir. This was the guy who was really responsible for putting together Goebbels' vision, because when it comes down to it, a propagandist is nothing without a good artist, because you may imagine things, but if you can't have somebody bring that imagination to life on paper, then it's hard to get that word out. So it's important to consider the artistry, and you see where he is idealizing these paramilitary stormtroopers, which were a key element in Nazi propaganda. So let's look at the Reichstag elections between 1928 and 1933. And what we're going to see here is kind of what's going on as far as the Nazi Party rising to power. So in 1928, you see that the Social Democrats, the National Conservatives, and the Catholic Center Party, they are the largest vote getters. Now, the Social Democrats, the hard left, quasi-Marxist party, the biggest vote getter. But then when you look at the National Conservatives and the Catholic Center, you see that between the two of them, they've got just about as many seats as the Social Democrats. So you've got a coalition government between these parties. Now, this is the so-called golden age of the Weimar Republic. To the extent that it ever had a golden age, it was kind of doomed from the start with the reparations and the loss of the war and the bad economy and all that stuff. But by the late 1920s, things seem to be stabilizing. And you can see by the parties that are getting elected that, it's really, it's seeming to be a pretty normal time, all right? So that's what you're looking at in 1928. And in that election, Hitler's Nazi Party came in 9th place with 2.6% of the vote and 14 of 491 seats. Now, this does not seem like a strategy to win, all right? That Hitler's going to use the democratic process. That doesn't seem to be going so well for Hitler. But there is an intervening event, and that intervening event is the Great Depression. And this Great Depression is going to be a turning point, because people are going to start rethinking the way that they vote. And they're going to start getting into, who's going to make this country great again, for lack of a better term, or something like that. So when we look at what's going on here in 1929, we see that the Nazis turn up the propaganda machine.
Break the dog's chains. America is not trying to help you.